Yep, we're going to start. Oh, let me give you a little introduction to Doug. Then we'll give it to Doug. So, Doug Eldred manages a family farm, Eldred Hay Grain and Seed in Auburn, New York. He grows about 60,000 bushels of certified seed, including oats, triticale, and barley. The straw goes to the horse market along with much of the hay. So with that, Doug, take it away and just let me know when you want the slides to change.
Okay, I will do that. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yep, you're looking good and sounding fine.
That's good. Well, again, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. I want to thank Aaron and Christian and all the people that work behind the scenes to put this grain school together. I know it's a lot of work, and you've been at it for months. And just thank you for allowing me to participate. Yes, we are a family farm. We've been doing this since the mid 60s, been in seed production since the mid 70s. We work 1,500 acres, and as was told, we do a lot of hay, a lot of certified seed, a little bit of corn for rotation, but our main focus is the hay and the certified seed. I've got a couple sons, a daughter, and a nephew that's involved with the business as well. And that's kind of the history on it. From here, I'm going to go into, from a seedsman's standpoint, on grain quality and what we do, some of the little, I don't know, some of the, not really tricks, but just some of the procedures that we do. First of all, to make certified seed, we have to have good quality grain. We're focused on keeping germination at a high level, keeping the purity at a high level. I don't know how much folks know about the procedure of making certified seed, but we're tied with Cornell and Ag and Markets as far as the testing procedures go. And main thing is you need to have good quality product if you're going to keep your customers happy. Primarily, we sell wholesale, but we do sell some retail. What I want to talk about is the thinking behind getting good quality seed. The main thing that hurts germination, and that's integral with seed, is heat. The main problem with heat would be is if you have dirty quality grain that's in that has been combined too wet, or if there's a lot of weed seeds or a lot of foreign material in the grain at harvest, it's going to be a problem in the bin, especially bins that don't have aeration. I'll touch on that a little bit later on at the end of my thing here, but it all starts in the field. Weed control is a key component to having good quality grain, subsequently good quality seed. My dad always said you can't grow two crops in the same field. It's either got to be the crop or you got weeds, and to be successful at it, you need to get rid of the weeds. The first and the easiest place to do it is with your weed control in the field. The next step really is at the combine. Over the years, we've done, back in the past, we've done some custom cleaning for neighbors and such. And many times I've seen grain come in for me to condition for them to use for seed that's just full of weed seeds or trash, leaves, all that type of material that takes away from a good quality grain. And the key component to that, or to control that, is to keep your combine adjusted right and get the air up right. It doesn't make you any more money putting a bunch of junk in the grain bin, in the combine bin or the grain bin. following the combine, of course, is putting the grain in the bin. One thing that I've learned over the years is that I use a barrel cleaner. I don't know, Aaron, if that's in line or if that's later on, kind of with the, okay, there we go. I call it a barrel cleaner. I don't know if that's correct, but it's a cheap way as far as in modern agriculture. $3,500, $4,000 will buy you a barrel cleaner, and that is a key component in keeping grain quality good before it even goes into the bin. I take it a step further in seed production, where I will use that machine to clean the grain, especially like oats and wheat and barley coming right out of the bin before it even goes into my system. That is more of a professional, if you would say, type of grain cleaning system that I've got in the seed building. If you wanted to run, Aaron, if you wanted to run that quick video, my son's into doing videos. Yeah, there's that. Yeah, try to run that video of the grain cleaning. We did this here. Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Doug, but we can't see the video. We didn't.
Yeah, I know. I couldn't see it either. I'm sorry about that. It was just a quick video kind of the grain cleaning system coming from basically from the bin going into the barn and into the different components, the different machines that we have in there to clean grain. Basically, we go through a debearder, which the debearder allows the grain, whatever you're doing, whatever you're cleaning, to be rubbed together. It breaks the barley beards off from barley. It'll break up the oat clumps that when you combine oats, a lot of times you'll notice that they're in a floret type where there's 2 or 3 couple small pin oats hooked to the grain itself, and it breaks that and singles that up. That kind of cleans the grain and makes it easier going through the screen and the air cleaner, which is the next step. From there, it goes off from the screen and the air cleaner onto a gravity table, which is kind of a final type cleaning system, and then goes to be bagged. I just can't stress enough the fact that every farmer ought to have at least, I mean, everybody's not going to have the same kind of seed equipment that I've got, because I do it for seed, but every grain farmer that's raising grain and storing it on farm really ought to invest in one of these barrel cleaners, because it just keeps the grain a lot in better condition, and being able to sell it on a commercial basis or use it for seed or what have you. It's a cheap way of, it's a cheap insurance, really. The other thing that I just wanted to touch on a little bit here at the end, I'm kind of getting out of time, is aeration in the bins. Again, as I said before, the main issue with germination is heat. Germination will start to go out of grain or start to degrade at 102 to 103 degrees. A lot of times when we're harvesting grain in the summer, oats, wheat, triticale, you're in a 80 to 90 degree day. Well, that grain's coming in at 80 to 90 degrees. You're taking that, especially if it's got a lot of foreign material or weed seeds that are green, that hadn't ought to be in it, and you're putting it into a bin where you've got thousands of bushels all put together into these bins. You need a good type of aeration system. Anything from, we've got them all kinds in tubes that aren't as efficient or aren't as good as a full floor. But in any event, you need to keep the air cool and keep air movement flowing through that grain for, a lot of times I'll run it for a week or 2 weeks, just to keep air movement through that. And if there is anything in the bin that is, the moisture isn't right and isn't dry, it will dry that out eventually in the summer months, and that will keep your grain. And you've got something that you can sell, and you've got something that will grow. And I think that's about the end of mine. There's a picture of the
Yeah.
bagged product.
I'm sorry
in
that the
bin.
video didn't work. It was just
Yeah.
fine for me. Um, if after the other speakers, maybe we can try it again. I think I know what I did wrong.
Okay, yeah, it's my son is in, my youngest son that works with me is into doing a lot of video work, and he's went online with a lot of his stuff on YouTube with a lot of stuff. And I just said, hey, can you give me some pictures? And he come up with that. I said, that's perfect. So anyway, thank you, Aaron. Thank you,
We'll
everyone.
give it another whirl later.
Yeah, all
So
right.
Matt Clute is on by phone, but we're gonna go next with Peter Martens. And Peter, if you wanna unmute,
Yep.
and I'll
Let
let
me
you
know when
take
you
it
can see
away.
me.
I can see you and hear you.
All right. Yeah. So I'm not much for just giving an outright presentation. So if anyone has questions, hold them for the period after, and I'll be happy to answer them as best I can. Thanks, Aaron, for having me. I'm not sure how much of an expert I am, but I will do the best that I can. I'd like to give a bit of an overview of what we do. We have about 1,900 acres that we are running that spread actually over 4 farms. There's a young man and his wife that are working with us that have a dairy farm. And then my wife and I have a farm. My parents have a farm, and our longest term #1 employee just recently bought his family's farm. So on those 4 cooperating farms, we can, in any given year, have up to 30 different crops when you count all the different varieties that need to be kept isolated. A lot of what we do is for seed or food grade sales. In 2019, we built a state-of-the-art grain cleaning plant. We had a lot of opportunity to build exactly what we wanted. We were starting completely from scratch. And we have a setup with a rotary drum pre-cleaner with an aspirator, similar to what Doug has, but larger capacity. It will do about 2,000 bushels per hour. Has an aspirator, has easily interchangeable screens set up so that we can use it to split a mixture of oats and peas or triticale and winter peas, anything like that. We are easily able to split outside in the pre-cleaner where it's not making a mess of our storage area or our processing area inside. We also have the ability to, with that pre-cleaner, remove the majority of contamination prior to grain going into storage, if that's necessary. We also have a traditional airstream cleaner, a destoner, a magnetic separator used for removing nuts, bolts, ball bearings, anything like that, but also dirt clods, which is a concern in dry edible beans. Dirt clods often are similar size, similar density, similar color to some beans. And because of that, they cannot be removed easily with an airstream cleaner. They can't be removed easily with a destoner, and they can't be removed easily with a color sorter or a gravity table. So that magnetic separator is very helpful there. We then pass through a gravity table, a dry polisher, which uses a set of brushes in a kind of a flighting configuration, sort of like an auger, scrubbing the grain against itself and also scrubbing the grain against a stainless steel screen. And then we also have an optical sorter that we can use at the end. For packaging, we're able to go into tote bags, 50-pound and 25-pound paper or poly bags. We're looking at getting into 1, 2, and 5-pound bags within the next year for more of a retail sale angle. For the most part, the food and seed grade, I'm not going to address the feed grade grains. They're a part of our rotation, but they're not really what we're talking about here. For the most part, our food and seed goes out in large volume contracts. However, we do hold back some of that for some regional food distributors or smaller seed companies. Generally, that is going to have an additional amount of attention paid to it because it is a higher level, higher value market. And then we currently are also holding out a subset of that is even better cleaned, that we are marketing as sort of a large retail in 25 and 50-pound bags directly to restaurants, food distributors, and also to some end users, people that are wanting to buy 25 or 50 pounds of kidney beans or black beans for their own home use. We have a lot of, I guess, knowledge that you can say that we've picked up over the years from making mistakes. One thing that we definitely do, and Doug talked about it as well, is if there is anything in the grain coming out of the field that is objectionable, any weed seeds, any other things that will affect the longevity of the grain in storage, we run the grain through the pre-cleaner before even we try to dry it. After that, we generally try to dry things with a large volume of air and a minimal temperature rise. For either food or seed, we shoot for about a 20 Fahrenheit over ambient temperature, air temperature for drying, but that is capped at 120 degrees maximum plenum temperature in the dryer. If we can dry with less temperature than that, we certainly do, but that is the top end. If we have a rare 105-degree day, we will not go over 120 degrees. Some of the equipment that we have for drying, we have a top dry for the large volume grains, the malting barley that we're doing 6,000 to 10,000 bushels per year of. We will run through the top dry with a low plenum temperature. Also, the spelt and some of the milling wheat will run through there just to get things dried quickly. We have 2 GT Toxiwick recirculating dryers that we use for smaller lots that would not make sense to run through the top dry. Things like the einkorn or emmer that we are growing. We do need to get them dry. They might come out of the field too wet to just stick straight in a bin with an aeration floor. But they do need slow drying. So we'll run a low plenum temperature, very high volume of air, and dry there. The issue with the Toxiwicks, at least with ours, is they are a 500 bushel capacity, but with less than about 300 bushels, they don't really work because the plenum is not covered. For smaller lots, we have some dryer wagons made out of old dump trucks, old grain trucks that have a false floor with grain bin flooring, perforated grain bin flooring, and a grain bin fan. One thing that we have noticed with that is if we need to remove more than 2 to 3% moisture, or if there are weed seeds or grain that does not allow air through easily, such as clover seed, we will every 24 hours maximum transfer the grain from one dryer wagon to another to disturb the pile and break up the drying front. We have had times where the grain never heats, but it does mold on top because we're just not able to push the moisture out consistently enough over the whole area. Our last method of storage is just standard grain bins with aeration floors. We only have, I believe, 2 bins without aeration floors out of the 22 that we have available for use. We have all different sizes. most of them have what would be considered an oversized fan for their capacity. We're just getting ready to put in 3 18-foot bins with 5 horsepower centrifugal fans that we're going to be using for dry edible beans, because I want to see a very high airflow, not necessarily for drying, but just to keep the air turnover so that we don't develop as much of a drying front. With dry edibles or soybeans, we do have to be careful that we don't dry too quickly so we don't cause splitting. For handling, we use bucket elevators, belt conveyors, and a chain loop. All of those tools cause a minimum of damage and are easy to clean out completely. We put VFDs on most everything that is electrical so we can run things in reverse to clean out and also verify cleanliness. And anywhere that we will be dropping beans or peas more than 10 feet, we are installing bean ladders that we're having built at a local welding shop. The belt conveyors we're also having built at that same local welding shop, and we're gradually learning how to do a better job with them. For storage of processed product, we have had some bad experiences storing grain in, especially food grade grains, in unsuitable areas where there's a wide range of humidities and temperatures. We've had spoilage, we've had some pretty significant losses. So when we built our new warehouse, we kind of went crazy and insulated it to an R40 in the walls and an R60 in the ceiling. And we are using an air conditioner to hold that at maximum of 50 degrees Fahrenheit year round. Right now it's sitting at about 43. It won't freeze in there, but it also will not come much above 50 during the summer. During the summer, we're also running dehumidifiers to try to hold the humidity between 50 and 60%. Just to maintain maximum quality. And we have found that we can hold soybean seed from year to year in those conditions, losing only 5 to 7% germ. In our old warehouse space that was ambient outdoor temperature, we would easily lose 15 to 20% germ from year to year on soybeans. So it has really helped. That at that temperature, we also don't have issues with insects. Insects do not readily move and reproduce over 50 degrees Fahrenheit or under 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So by keeping our humidity and our temperature down, we really minimize the likelihood of some of the pests that we otherwise would have to manage for with a fungicide, or not a fungicide, an insecticide that we are not able to use, or diatomaceous earth, which has some real workplace safety issues. It's not good to breathe diatomaceous earth dust in. So we try to minimize our problems. For rodent management, we have an exterior perimeter that is a footer drain backfilled with round stone, washed round stone. We have a concrete knee wall around the entire facility, around the entire building, at least 16 inches above grade. So the only points of potential ingress for rodents are through the overhead doors, which we keep strictly closed whenever they're not in use. The last thing that I'm going to mention that we have learned, and then I will hand it over to Aaron again, is for inventory management. We generally, if we're going to sell something within 3 months, we will put it in the 50-pound, 25-pound bags that the end user wants. If it's for longer term storage, we like to use tote bags, because if you do end up with issues with rodents or issues with insects, a tote bag is much harder for those creatures to set up house in. And if there's damage, it is often localized just to the top of the tote, and mitigation of damage is a lot easier. So I guess I'm open to questions. I'm sure I missed some things that people are interested in, but I'll hand it back over to Aaron now.
Okay, thank you, Peter. And I forgot to give your little introduction when you started, but I will introduce Matt Clute. Matt is one of many members of Kloot Brothers, Inc., a family farm in the town of Kendall in Orleans County, New York. The farm includes 8,000 acres of grain and 600 acres of vegetables. Kloot Brothers is a fourth generation business that started in the 1930s with Otto Kloot, who was a German immigrant. They have continued to this day through good management and adopting new technologies. So Matt is on the phone, and Matt, I will let you take it away.
Thanks, Aaron. Yes, our farm was started years ago with my great-grandfather, and it's still going strong with the fifth generation pushing into the farm now. They're still in school, but they're excited to get out there and work with us. But the numbers are a little off. We farm around 8,000 acres, and about half of those are vegetables, half of those are grain. So it's just a little bit different in numbers. But over the years, we've made our share of mistakes, and hopefully we don't make too many of them. Seems like after all this time, we are always finding something new that is going wrong with grain, but we try to do everything, the best we can. But weevil in wheat or, a high fine year in corn, puts challenges on it. 2 years ago, we had some real high moisture corn that we had to take down from, say, 35% down to 15% to store it. And we ended up with more fines from the combines and from the conveyors and from drying it from such a high point that we ended up with a few problems, that nothing that got out of control, but, just things to manage throughout the year. So when we start the season this time of the year, we're always looking at the varieties that we grow. And so the technology that they're putting into the seed is really amazing. But, we're looking for the highest quality grain, the highest test weight. But a lot of times test weight doesn't equate to yield. For some reason, the highest test weight varieties in our experience haven't been the highest yielders. The highest yielders tend to be some of the lowest test weight grains. So you got to kind of play that game where you have some high test weight mixed with some high yield, and manage that in the bin somehow. So a lot of times, we run a large operation, yes, but we're geared up to run high volumes of corn. A lot of times we'll bring in 30 to 50,000 bushel of corn a day is an average day for us. We have two 12-row combines that have buggies running alongside of them, 1,000 bushel buggies, and we'll have 4 or 5 trucks sitting along the road waiting to be loaded, and they just keep pouring into the granary all day long. And so we have to be able to do something with the corn. So last year we invested into a new grain dryer, a tower grain dryer, which we had a grain dryer before, a tower, but this new one was supposed to have better quality grain, so we could lower the plenum temperature and not put as much stress on whatever we're drying. So our goal was to oversize the dryer for bushels so we could keep the plenum temperature low. And so when we're bringing corn in, we use drag conveyors or chain conveyors to take it off the truck, and we run those on a frequency drive, and we only run it as fast as what we need to run it to feed the dryer or to get the trucks unloaded. So we run that to this dryer, and we usually don't run the plenum temperature higher than 180, 190 degrees. And that tends to keep the corn from cracking because it'll take it up quickly to 180 degrees. And then as it's coming down through this tower, it cools it quickly and then unloads it into a bucket elevator. And at that point, we're cleaning it. So we've got an aspirator that's kind of sucking air through the grain over a series of drops. So there'll be like a foot or two drop and it's sucking air up through it. And then it'll go over a foot or two drop and suck air up through it. And it gets sucked into a truck that we have that collects it. And it collects a lot of red beeswings or pods with soybeans or chaff with wheat. And we'll discard it to either a neighbor who wants to feed it, or we'll just dump it out into a field and kind of spread it around. But as it's going up the bucket elevator, we disperse it into bins, and we've got a series of probably, 12 or 14 different bins that range in sizes from 10,000 bushel to 200,000 bushel bins. I try not to put more than 50,000 bushel in a bin in one single day. I don't know what the experts say, but I tend to unload in this bin today and that bin tomorrow and then another bin the next day. And I try to come back and then start all over maybe on the third day to try to give the fans enough time to keep the grain cool. So coming out of the dryer, it's probably no warmer than 60. It depends on the ambient air temperature, but it's probably not any warmer than 60. It's usually in the fall, it's cool here. But we just try not to overload the fans, so we spread it out. And so we do have grain spreaders inside of the bins, and some of the newer bins also have temperature cables inside. So this is simply just a cable. There may be every 6 foot or 10 foot in the bin going all the way around it that stretch from the roof all the way to the floor. So before we fill it, we have to tie it to the floor. So we just take a little piece of string, hook it to a self-tap and screw, and tie it down tight. And I can get a reading off a little handheld monitor that tells me the temperature all the way around the bin, all the way to the roof of the bin. It'll give me a reading. And so I can monitor it that way. And that kind of allows us a little peace of mind knowing that in a 200,000 bushel bin, as long as the temperature cables are reading right, that we know what it is. So we're putting grain in bins, knowing temperatures. It's kind of a good feeling. After we get them filled, I go up and I try not to cone them too high, but you really can't control the flow at which it spreads it out. So it's coming in faster than a lot of times than what the spreader will spread it. So I end up with a cone top. So sometimes I'll go in, I'll take a shovel up there and shovel the top around so it's level full. And sometimes I'll just leave it knowing that we're hauling corn away in the fall as we're bringing it in, and we'll core it right away. So we'll take 5 to 10 loads out of the bin, depending on how big it is, until we get nice even airflow up through the grain. And if you get in the bin and you're standing in the center of the bin, if you pick up a handful of grain, in the center of the bin will be more cracked corn, more beeswings, just more impurities in the center. And if you pick that corn up and you throw it like a baseball, the fines tend to fall in the center where you can throw corn all the way to the outside. So that's the way the bin ends up in these wide bins. So some of our bins are as wide as 72 feet wide. And so you end up with with poor quality stuff in the center that that won't store for a long period of time. So when we schedule corn to be sold or trucked out of there, we try to schedule the bins to be cored. So whoever we're selling it to, whether it be a feed mill or the ethanol plant, you know, we tell them, you know, this is the core of such and such a bin, and, you know, they'll do something with it maybe a little different, or, you know, a lot of times they'll say to us, you gotta clean it a little better. And basically coming out of the bins, we don't have a way to clean it. So we'll end up blending it. We'll mix, you know, half a load of a core and then move to a bin that is nice and clean, and we'll have to blend it out that way. We also have on the sides of our bins a chute that's like a gravity chute, and it just has a gate valve on it. We'll open the gate valve up and we'll load a truck right out of the side of the bin, so it takes no electric. But a lot of times coming out of those side chutes, you get nice quality grain off of the outside of the bin. But if you don't manage the grain somehow in these big bins, you'll end up with a problem if you try to hold it all the way till June or July without coring it. I haven't figured out how to core it or how to keep it without coring it, and you'd have to run the fans a lot. You'd spend a lot of money in electricity if you didn't. You'd have to run the fans quite often. After we core the bins, I only run the fans for probably 6 hours a month, depending on what the air temperature is. And I try never to freeze the grain while it's in the bin. I try to always run it on sunny days with low humidity, and never on days when it's raining or snowing. But, you know, I try to do it when it's sunny out and, you know, around that 40-degree mark, 38, somewhere's in there, and never freeze it. If you freeze the grain, you end up with moisture in there, and it tends to stick to the sidewalls of the bin, and it seems to introduce problems in the spring as it starts to warm up. You know, you get that moisture, that freezing and thawing, and I don't know. We try not to do that. And a lot of these things we've learned from years past. But a couple years ago, it was so cold when we were harvesting that we were bringing in actual frozen grain from the combine. The combine was shelling frozen grain, and it was coming in frozen, and we couldn't actually test the moisture of the grain until it got thawed out. And so while it was in the dryer, it would thaw out, and we couldn't use a lot of the sensors that read moisture in the dryer. We just had to keep testing it coming out the bottom, making sure it was dry enough to store, you know, something below 15, usually 14 to 15%. We put it in the bin and keep it that way. So every year is a little different. For insects in the bin, we use various insecticides. For corn, we're using malathion. We have a spray nozzle and a pump, so as it's coming out of our dryer or off the truck, we can spray it right onto the grain in a nice even fashion, and it can get spread around in the bin, and we usually don't have any trouble in corn. In wheat, we use a product called Storeside, and we typically don't have problems, but every once in a while a weevil will show up, and this year that happened to us. We didn't have any weevils, and then all of a sudden after Christmas here, we took a load out of the bin and to deliver on a contract, and found some in the sample, so we ended up having to treat it with a chemical that I can't think of the name right now, but we treated it in a bin, and we were able to kill them and deliver the grain. Just looking at my notes here, watching the combines in the field, and giving the operators feedback as to what you see coming out of the trailer is crucial, because, these combines are doing, they're doing 3 to 5,000 bushel an hour. Oh, they're doing 3 to 5,000 bushel an hour, and they can do a lot of grain, and you could have a big quality issue. By the time I see it, if I'm at the granary unloading trucks, and the combines will hold 500 bushel a piece, and the buggy will hold 1,000 bushel a piece, and we got 3 or 4 trucks there, we could have, just say, 5 to 10,000 bushel before I actually see it. And, I get on the phone and say, hey, you're getting a lot of cracked corn, or you're getting a lot of cob, or a lot of pods in soybeans or weed seeds, what's going on. And so I'm constantly looking at the trucks as we're unloading them. I'm putting my hands into them, scooping the corn out, and really, really keeping an eye on it. But for us, we do have, like I say, temperature cables in the newer bins and some big CFM fans to put big air up through it. But probably the best way to control, in my eyes, to control the temperature and the quality is I try to pull a load or 2 out of each bin a week going throughout the year. So we schedule grain to be delivered, and we have 1 to 2 trucks running here or there all winter long, and we're constantly moving. If you're moving that grain, it tends to not heat up. So you're taking that cool corn from the top, or cool soybeans, and you're putting it down through the center, and we tend to not have any trouble. And if we're moving more than that, I don't even run the fans. I just monitor it with the temperature cables. But it all comes back to a systems approach, and you got to just keep an eye on everything. I do walk the bins. I try to get up and look to see if there's snow laying on top of the grain. The wind will blow. Where we live, we're right on the shores of Lake Ontario, and the wind will blow the snow into the top, sometimes right up through the eaves, and it'll sift in there. And we've had it 3 foot deep drift in there. And if you let that go down through, just say you take 1 load out and then it melts in there for some reason, the corn is 40 degrees and it melts, and you don't move any corn out of that, or grain or soybeans or wheat out of that bin, it could mold, and then it'll plug your center sump. We've had that before, and it's not fun to try to get it opened up. We've cut holes in the sides of bins before, and stuck augers in them, and we've pulled augers. We've done many different things to try to get rid of mistakes, but doing all these different things tends to minimize it, and it helps that if you have guys with experience that know what to look for. That a lot of times the drivers, as they're taking grain out of the bins, they're putting their hands into it. Every now and then they'll grab a handful of it and feel that grain, and if it feels warm, they're going, hey, look at, we got a problem in here. So they're keeping an eye on it, and like I said, we're trying to do the best job we can with the quality, with the dryer, and with the heat, with the temperature. So that's about all I got on quality and technology that we're using. I guess we're not at the point. I know there is automated aeration fan controls, and we don't have a bin with it on there yet. I tend to just do it manually and, watch the weather, the humidity, and temperature that way. But that's what we're doing here on our farm.
Great. Thank you, Matt. That was very good.
Sure.
So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see the chat box a little bit better. And between Christian and I think we'll be able to see people's questions. So I think what we want to do is if you have a question, to raise your hand, there's a little icon you can click on, and you can also, and when you click on that icon and raise your hand, Christian will unmute you and then you can speak. And there's also the question and answer box where you can type your questions.
And everybody should have the power to unmute themselves to ask a question. So Paul, go ahead and give it a try if you can unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, all good.
Okay, so my question is, anybody like myself that's got grain in storage at one point or another has done just what Matt just talked about, had a bin plug, and they always tend to plug, always seems like they plug when they're full. And if you've got a deep bin and you're trying to unplug it, it can be a real challenge. So I guess I'm asking if anybody's come up with a silver bullet. How do you unplug a bin that's not flowing anymore?
Well, this is how we've done it. We have a grain vac, and I mean, we have tried everything, including we've pulled the augers out of the bins, and we've taken a large air compressor, and I took a 1-inch piece of pipe, threaded lengths together, and we hooked an air compressor to it. And on the end of the 1-inch pipe, I put a nipple, like a 6-inch nipple on it, something big enough that I can get it turned up towards the center sump hole. And I've taken air and put air up through it. And I have been able to break the center sump free. So after the tube fills with corn, I pull the 1-inch line back out, and then you have to screw the auger back in, but I've had it stop running after you go through all that work, putting the auger back in. So it's a lot of work to pull the auger back out. And we've even done it with acetylene. We've taken that 1-inch line, we put a torch to it, and we fill the line with acetylene and light it on fire for the concussion. And the same thing, we've had it fill the tube with corn and then stop running again. So we have cut holes in the side of the bin and drove that 1-inch line into the side of the bin and tried to keep it towards the center and kept blowing air and kept working the pipe in. We've tried that and have failed at that. The thing that we do is we have a little funnel that we open the man door and we bolt this funnel to the outside of the man door. So it's just a tapered piece of iron. And we've got a hole in the inner man door. We open this little hole up. We've cut them all and we've made like a trap door. It's maybe 6 inches or 4 inches square or round, whatever you might want to make. We open that hole up and let the grain trickle out the side. And then we have a grain vac or an auger underneath it. We've had them run into augers too. And we just load it out and hope the grain bin doesn't kink. taking it out the side. And we unload it, and we open until we can get the man door open. We go inside, we poked at it. It's nothing but hard work. So that's what we've done.
I feel your pain, been there. So
Yep.
sitting here listening to the discussions, my brain is working, and the sad fact of the matter is almost all of us that have bins with large diameters have a sump near the door. So when you're finally down to where you got to clean the bin, you open that second sump to clean the door. Why aren't we smart enough to put a second sump a foot or two away from the center of the bin in the first place?
The new bins all have that. I mean, our new bins probably have 8 or 10 doors. So they're for emergency purposes. So we've never had that happen in a bin that we've put up in the last 10 years because there are like 8 or 10 doors. But most of the time the trouble's coming from the older bins, the bins that were built in the 80s and the early 90s that only have 2 doors. It's got a center and a side door on the thing.
We put up a new Lambton bin last year, and the center sump is on a rod. The next sump out from center is on a separate rod, and then all of the other intermediate sumps are on a third rod, which I think is a major improvement over how the older, even bins 6-7 years older than that, had only 2 control rods.
Okay, I'm done. Thank you. I appreciate that. Just, we all like to share our pain from past experiences, and I'm sure we've all felt that first call you get that says the grain stopped flowing.
Yep.
It's never a good call.
Yep.
Christian, there's a question in the Q&A box.
Yeah, it is from Sean, excuse me if I mispronounce this, Gingyu. Sean, do you want to ask it yourself, or do you want me to ask it for you?
Can you guys hear me?
Is this you, Sean?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Sean. It's Sean
Yep.
Zhang. It doesn't look like Zhang, but that's fine. My question, I'm building starting with grain infrastructure this year, putting in a couple bins for basically wheat and malting barley. Just curious if any of you guys have had any experience with stirrators with heat plenums on the fan, and if you've been able to dry grain down from 16-17%, or is it smarter just to look for a batch dryer or some old continuous flow machine?
We routinely will put spelt or oats into a bin at 16 to 17% moisture. We make a point of running a low temperature heater. We actually have a thermostat right on the plenum space. Usually set that at 10 to 15 degrees above ambient temperature. And the other thing that you have to pay attention to now with the stirrator, it's going to make a bit of a difference because that's disrupting the pile. But our bins do not have stirrators. We just make sure we pull the core out of the bin after running the fans for 3 or 4 days and get that turned over so that we're not that core is not going to dry effectively because the air is going to flow out around it.
Okay.
So it's not with wheat. I would be a little bit more concerned because wheat does not flow quite as easily. Air doesn't allow air to flow quite as easily. With barley, I think you would be okay. But it does take management. It's not a matter of throw it in there, turn the heater on, and forget it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Does anyone else want to add some advice to drying barley and wheat? Any other experience out there?
We have a set of equilibrium moisture charts that we rely on pretty heavily that gives for each given set of temperature and humidity what the moisture level that the grain will naturally go towards. And we've actually learned quite a lot from that quite often people will just turn fans on with no heater and walk away and come back 3 weeks later. Why isn't the grain dry? Well, if the humidity has been too high, it's not going to dry. And where you think those points are and where they actually are not necessarily the same thing. A.N. Martin Grain Systems and their yearly catalog has a set of those charts in the back of the yearly catalog. And I'm sure there's other sources online to find them at as well.
Yes, sir. I have EMC charts on my webpage for corn, soybeans, wheat, and grain sorghum. And I can produce others. So, but they're from the same source. They're from the American Society of Agricultural and Biological Engineers. Yeah, they're not easily found often. So I'm glad to, yeah.
I have a pretty comprehensive set, including a number of different types of dry edible beans, popcorn, about a half a dozen different grains, and it's been quite valuable.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's your Bible for guidance.
Yep.
I'll jump in with a question while people think of their others, of their questions. So it seems like grain bin accidents happen most in difficult years when corn and grains are coming in at high moisture. And I know, a lot of farmers don't clean out the broken kernels and some of the fines because then they have less to sell.
Mhm.
So as far as, storing corn in a wet year, if conditions are bad, do you suggest cleaning out the corn before drying to save on those drying costs and add a little safety to the bin? I mean, how do you manage corn in a wet year so you're not losing money, not spending too much on drying, and not creating problems in the bin?
I would think in that situation, you do need to clean after drying because fines are created in the drying process.
So would you clean before and after, or just
Probably
after?
just after.
Yeah.
But that's just my take on it.
We clean before and after. We get some bees wings before it's hard to get cracked corn from the combine out with a wet sticky grain, but we get a lot of bees wings out before it goes in the dryer, and then we can get some of the cracked corn and some of the bees wings out afterwards. But you got to be careful. We've done it where we've only filled the bin halfway, taken a load out, looked in it, made sure it was corn in the right spot, and then filled it the rest of the way and cored it. And just got to keep your arms around it.
Yeah. Thank you. There's a question in the question box. What factors affect germination of barley grown for malting? How much is affected from the field and growing season versus harvest and storage? Doug, do you want to take that?
Well, again, you can run into some germination issues with disease, but mainly it's heat. You just can't let that barley get too warm, or you're going to degrade germination. Whatever it takes to keep that from happening, that's what you want to strive towards.
So for malting barley, we recommend harvest at 18% or so,
Yep.
which means you need to go to Minnesota to that website with fans and have a fan that's got enough capacity to really blow a lot of air.
Blow a lot of air and keep if you can, keep the level of the bin so that there's not a completely full bin. In other words, if you're blowing air through 3 feet of grain with a full floor bin fan set up, you're going to dry that grain a lot easier than if you've got 6 or 10 or 15 feet of grain in there. So if you can spread it out over a larger area and you're not working with that big a depth, you're much more efficient drying it with just air. And you got to be careful putting heat to it. I mean, yeah, that's a tough one, really, bringing in barley at 18%, because you're almost harvesting it almost too wet in my book. But you know, that's what the consumer wants, you know.
So do any of you have stirrers in your bins? You know, when do you recommend using them? Would you recommend them?
I've got them, but don't use them. I don't know. There's newer drying systems that work, but I'm not saying that they don't work. They do, but they can be kind of a nightmare as far as maintenance and keeping them going.
So I'm just gonna go through my questions until someone else asks a question. So I was working with a couple farmers with the barrel screen cleaners. One was
Mhm.
doing rye, one was doing wheat. And I guess maybe those cleaners were fairly new to them, but you know, there was grain getting stuck in the screens, and some of the wheat hadn't threshed out, so there were wheat heads getting stuck in the screens, and it just seemed like a difficult tool for small grains, and it seemed to me more useful for like corn and soybeans. So using those barrel screeners for small grains, I mean, what's the trick to keeping them flowing and you know, working right?
Keeping track of them, and if you got to stop and clean them, stop and clean them. I mean, normally I don't really have too much trouble, and I put a lot of, you know, thousands of bushels through them without having to clean them. But yeah, I know it just depends. It's like going back to what I first said. The main thing is try to keep your grain as it's coming out of the field as clean as you can. It's you know, crap in, crap out, kind of, you know.
And you know, and each season grain size is going to be slightly different, and there's
Oh
only
yeah.
so many screen sizes that you can stick in those.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't the
Right.
easiest thing to change a screen, but
It's not easy, and you hate to see good grain ending up on the ground, but in any cleaning process, it's not perfect, and you know, you're going to have to give up some good grain to get the garbage out of it. It's that way with screen cleaners and gravity tables as well. There's, you know, there's a give and take to it. It's never perfect unless you've got what Peter's got as far as some of the more modern, but they're slow too, as far as the optical type cleaners and that sort of thing, the air optical cleaners.
Even with them, we assume that we're going to lose 1% good material for each percent bad that we take out.
Yep. So, you know, it's not a perfect scenario. You just do the best you can with it.
okay.
Often we will take the clean out off of our gravity table or optical sorter and rerun that later on if there's too much good stuff in there.
Yeah.
It's a slow process with different settings, but depending on the value of what you have, it can be worthwhile.
Yep. And I'll do the same thing.
How about your experience drying grain in the 1-ton totes? How wet would you put grain in a 1-ton tote and try to dry it with one of those screw-in aerators?
I wouldn't even try it.
Nope, I wouldn't either. I wouldn't even hardly do it in a gravity flow wagon. I've seen guys try to do that, and you might keep it from molding, but that's about it. You won't dry it.
The only thing we use screw-in aerators for is this time of year, if we have to be cleaning peas or soybeans, we'll load them into a truck or a wagon with a screw-in aerator and park it in the shop with the heat on overnight with the aerator going to warm the beans up.
Yep.
Okay.
I don't like processing things like that are brittle when it's 15 degrees out, but sometimes schedules force you to.
Mm-hmm.
You have any tips on saving on drying costs? I know everyone's got a different type of dryer and a different system.
Generally speaking, the faster and hotter you dry, the more efficient and the less energy you're going to use, but that's not viable for food or seed grade products.
We've always found that we start earlier. We start when the grain is, excuse me, around 25%. We start harvesting, and rather than wait for the grain to, I'm talking corn here, rather than wait for the grain to dry down below 20, you know, to save some money in propane. But a lot of times the ambient air temperature is warmer, so you're not heating it up as much. If you wait till November, there's a lot of nights that it could be down in the 20s. So I don't know, we tend to go after it while the field conditions are drier, so we're not rutting the fields up and in October rather than wait for it to dry down. You know, some years you could wait and possibly save some money in gas, but I don't know. That's our mindset.
I've always thought that the potential quality and yield loss from waiting after it's mature and mostly dry is a greater loss than the cost of drying.
Yep.
The other angle that I take with corn, and we don't do an awful lot of corn compared to a lot of neighbors, a lot of you folks, but I go for a shorter season variety that's drier quicker in the field, so that, you know, in a lot of these newer shorter season, and I don't mean extremely short, but instead of raising 95 to 100-day corn, I'm looking at 90-day corn or 92-day corn that seems to dry down a lot faster, and my, you know, my drying costs are a lot less than having to deal with, you know, 28 to 30% corn. But you know, every year's different.
I think one of the valuable things that's not always viable for smaller farms is we have, for 1,900 acres, we have two combines, one with a 20-foot head and one with a 30-foot head. And when grain is ripe, we go really fast and get it out of the field when we have the right conditions. And there might be a day that we get our barley down to 14, 15%. We want to get it all done in that day. And we typically have 110 to 130 acres of barley in a given year. We've had to build our receiving equipment to handle things at that speed. But by picking that one day when conditions are ideal, we're not fighting with weather later on, or potentially fighting with weather later on.
See, there's another question here in the box from Larry Scott. On a small operation with a fan AB8 dryer, a fan's AB8 dryer, do you recommend cooling corn after the heat cycle in the dryer or cooling in the bin? I'm not familiar with that dryer. Is that a continuous dryer or a batch dryer?
I think it can be running either mode, but I just responded. Cooling in the bin should work as long as you have about a half a CFM per bushel capacity for in-bin cooling. It'll give you a little more, certainly it'll give you more time, add to your drying capacity for the day, and give you a little better quality grain. I think the only concern would be that you have enough fan power or fan horsepower to get it cooled.
Mm-hmm.
We've used, years ago, we used to dry with a top dry, and a lot of times when we would unload, we'd unload into a bin that had high CFM cooling fans on it, and we could dump corn at, say, 16, 17%, put it in that steeping bin and leave it sit in there for a matter of hours, and then turn the fans on and cool it, and then unload out of there. So we would move the grain twice, so you that way you know that you're not getting a hot spot. At least, you know, even if you do have a little hot spot, you're mixing it around when you put it in the storage bin.
Yeah, I like that approach also because you don't have any condensation dripping back on the grain. So moving it that second time takes that problem away.
Do any of you determine your grain storage costs? And how do you do that? Do you have your own little system or use one of the Iowa State spreadsheets, or? It's a tough thing to determine, huh?
Yeah,
To-
it's
Yeah.
tough.
I guess what is
just
the,
use
what is, go ahead.
I use the electricity that we're using in the off months, you know, and I don't know, there's some shrink, but I try to, just when I think I got it figured out, you know, and I get a curveball and I tend to not talk about it, you know, it's some years you get some shrink, you know, cause you're putting it in, you put it in the bin at 15 and you're taking it out at 13. And then some years you take it out and it's 14 and a half, 15. So I don't know what you lose.
So we're past 2:00. I want to ask one last question. How do you implement safety measures?
As far as being in a bin,
Well, just, you know, so we talked a lot about being in a bin and not going in a bin, but there's a lot of other safety measures around a grain facility, just slips and falls, falling off a ladder. We have electricity, we have propane. Um, you know, it's a farm, so everything is dangerous. Uh, so I guess, you know, how do you train employees? You take time to train employees? Do you make sure all your signs are readable? Um, you know, do you take any extra measures?
unfortunately around here, we've had, not on our farm, but in Yates County, there have been 2 deaths in grain storage in the last 5 years, 7 years, I guess now. Pretty much everyone is very conscious of the risks because they knew the people involved.
Yeah. It's a hard way to learn, though.
It is.
Yes, it is.
As far as lockout, everything that we've been building electrically is built so that we have a central lockout location that we can be sure power is off. If we have to be in a place where there is a determined risk, we make sure that that power is off. And generally, if someone needs to be inside a bin, there needs to be 2 people around.
We're doing the same thing that he just said. You know, we're using the buddy system, and there's only generally 1 or 2 people that should be pushing buttons, and without the okay of one of those 2 guys, nobody else does anything. So if you're going to come into the place, you want to check with who's ever running the place before you go ahead and start an auger or doing something. So communication and the buddy system and the lockout tag out.
Yeah, we're doing basically the same thing. And the other end of it is that there's only a limited number of people on the facility that that can go into the bins. that way, at least you're limiting your number unless someone goes in that's not supposed to.
There is one more question in the chat by Andrew Morrill. Does anyone have experience with smaller bins with fans mounted in the side?
We've got some of them. You've got to have them on a tube going through. I'm presuming on the side, meaning low or 2 or 3 feet off the ground. They work if you're not trying to. They work for a maintenance type of thing. You're not going to dry grain with them, basically.
There was another question in the chat as well. We have bins of barley with between 15 and 16% moisture. We only have fans on those bins. What is the maximum humidity level that everyone would recommend running the fans without knowing the temperatures inside the bins?
It's really hard to answer without knowing the temperature inside the bins. I'm going to look at the chart that I work from. Right now, I can tell you that there's almost no humidity that you can run that fan at our current temperatures that you're going to be doing any good. But barley, generally speaking, it does not pay to run a fan above roughly 55% humidity unless the temperature is fairly high.
So the question is if there's any heating though, so you're probably not going to be able to dry anything, but if there's any heating, even if it's a high humidity, you have to get rid of that heat. Otherwise you got a compost pile in your bin.
Yeah.
You got that correct.
Another option, if there are no heaters on those bins, is to get a propane ready heater, 60,000 BTU heater hooked up to a grill tank and blow that into the inlet of the fan. We do that routinely, and at least once a year I have to yell at someone who's gone and gotten the kerosene heater because that one gives less trouble. Well, it also is going to bring a smell to the grain. So you've got to use propane for that job.
All right. And Sean Schaus, our speaker for next week, said that this time of year is temperature control and monitoring only. Drying will have to wait until spring. So,
Yep.
So it's 2:20. I don't see any new questions. Should we let everybody go? I appreciate everybody hanging in here and for our panel.